Sam and Clara positioned themselves on a ridge overlooking the camp where they could watch the Sunday service without being seen. Through his field glasses, Sam could see the miners and their families gathered around a makeshift altar, listening to a tall, thin man in a black coat who gestured emphatically as he spoke. "That's Parker," Clara whispered, pointing to the preacher. "See how he moves, like he's got fire in his belly." Sam studied the man through his glasses. Reverend Parker was younger than he'd expected, maybe 45, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of lean, weathered face that spoke of years in the desert sun. But it was his eyes that caught Sam's attention. Dark, intense, burning with the kind of righteous fury that could move mountains or start wars. The service ended just after noon, and the miners began drifting back to their tents and shacks. Parker lingered by the altar, packing his Bible and prayer book with deliberate care. When the last of the congregation had gone, he looked up toward the ridge where Sam and Clara were hidden. "He knows we're here," Sam muttered. "Good. That means Maria got the message through." Parker walked slowly toward the canyon wall, following a narrow trail that led up toward their position. He moved with the careful confidence of a man who'd spent years navigating dangerous terrain, both physical and spiritual. Sam and Clara climbed down to meet him halfway, Clara moving carefully to avoid aggravating her wound. When they were close enough to speak without shouting, Parker stopped and studied them both with those burning eyes. "Clara Whitfield," he said, his voice carrying the resonance of years spent preaching to crowds. "Maria Santos said you needed to speak with me about your father." "Reverend Parker," Clara replied, inclining her head respectfully. "Thank you for coming. This is Samuel Holloway. He's been helping me." Parker's gaze shifted to Sam, taking in the rifle, the weathered clothes, the careful way he positioned himself to watch for threats. "You're the hermit from the western desert. I've heard stories." "Most of them probably true," Sam said dryly. "Maria said you have information about Victor Caldwell, information that might help bring him to justice." Clara glanced at Sam, who nodded slightly. They'd agreed that directness was the best approach with Parker. The man had already lost his son to Caldwell's violence, and he deserved to know exactly what they were dealing with. "Reverend," Clara began. "My father discovered evidence that Victor committed war crimes during the conflict, mass murder of civilians, including women and children. We think that's why Victor killed him and why he's trying to kill me now." Parker's face went very still. "What kind of evidence?" "Documents, witness statements, maybe photographs. Daddy hid everything before he died, left me clues to find it." "And you think this evidence could bring Caldwell down?" "If we can get it to the right people," Sam interjected. "But we need help. Someone who knows the territory, who has connections Caldwell can't buy." Parker was quiet for a long time, staring out at the desert while he wrestled with his decision. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Victor Caldwell murdered my son. Shot him in the back and left his body for the buzzards, all because the boy was asking questions about missing silver shipments and forged mining claims." "Can you prove it?" Clara asked. "No. That's the devil of it. Everyone knows Caldwell's guilty, but he's too smart to leave evidence lying around. Too rich to worry about honest law enforcement." Parker's hands clenched into fists. "But if you have proof of other crimes, federal crimes from the war, that changes everything." "How so?" Sam asked. "Territorial authorities might look the other way when it comes to local murders and thefts. But war crimes, that's federal jurisdiction. Army investigators, federal marshals, politicians in Washington who don't answer to Caldwell's money." Sam felt a surge of hope. He'd been wondering how they could possibly bring down a man with Caldwell's resources and connections. But Parker was right. Federal authority trumped local corruption. "What do you need from me?" Parker asked. "Information mostly," Clara replied, "about Daddy's business in the months before he died, about places he might have hidden evidence, and if possible, safe passage to Socorro in Tucson." "Socorro?" Parker's eyebrows rose. "Why Socorro?" Clara explained about her father's letter and their theory about the Spanish mission. Parker listened intently, occasionally asking questions that showed he understood both the territory and the kind of man Clara's father had been. "Your father was smart," Parker said when she finished. "Socorro's perfect, close enough to be convenient, far enough to be safe, and the old mission has hiding places the Spanish built to keep treasures safe from Apache raids." "You know the mission?" Sam asked. "Father Miguel is an old friend. We studied together back east before I came out here. He's one of the few men in the territory who isn't afraid of Caldwell, mainly because the church protects him, and he has nothing Caldwell wants. Will he help us? If I ask him to, yes, but we'll need to be careful getting there. Caldwell has men watching the main roads, and Socorro's only 2 days' ride from his ranch. Sam studied the preacher's face, looking for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. But Parker's anger was genuine, his desire for justice burning as bright as the desert sun. There's something else, Parker continued. Something you need to know about Caldwell's operations. He's not just stealing and murdering for profit anymore. He's getting ready to make a move for political power. What kind of move? Clara asked. Word is he's planning to run for territorial delegate to Congress. With his money and connections, he could buy enough votes to win, and once he's in Washington, he'd be untouchable, Sam finished. Exactly. Federal protection, political immunity, access to resources we can't even imagine. If Caldwell gets that kind of power, men like us will just disappear. Sam felt the familiar chill of approaching danger. They weren't just racing against Caldwell's search parties, they were racing against time itself. How long do we have? Clara asked. Election's in November. It's August now, so maybe 3 months before Caldwell starts his campaign in earnest. But if he's desperate to silence you... Parker didn't need to finish the thought. They all knew that desperate men took desperate chances, and Caldwell had already shown he was willing to kill to protect his secrets. We leave for Socorro tomorrow night, Sam decided. Dark of the moon, less chance of being spotted. Can you arrange things with this Father Miguel? I'll ride out tonight, Parker promised. Tell him to expect visitors with urgent business, but I'll need to know how to contact you once you've found what you're looking for. They spent the next hour working out details, meeting points, coded messages, contingency plans for if everything went wrong. Parker proved to be a valuable source of information about Caldwell's operations, filling in gaps that helped Sam understand the scope of what they were facing. One more thing, Parker said as they prepared to part ways. Maria Santos wants to know if you've seen any sign of her daughter Elena. Clara's face fell. No, I'm sorry. Victor kept me isolated at the ranch, didn't let me interact with the household staff. But if we bring him down... I know, Parker said gently. One step at a time. First we get justice for the dead, then we save the living. As they rode back toward Sam's cabin, Clara was unusually quiet. Sam could see her struggling with something, her hands tight on the reins despite her efforts to appear calm. What's eating at you? He asked finally. Parker's son, Elena Santos, all the other people Victor has heard over the years. Clara's voice was tight with suppressed emotion. What if we're too late? What if the evidence Daddy left isn't enough? Then we make it enough, Sam replied. We find another way. Gather more proof, keep fighting until we win. And if we can't win... Sam was quiet for a moment, thinking about all the battles he'd fought, all the causes he'd believed in, all the times he'd had to choose between safety and justice. Then we make sure Caldwell pays as high a price as possible for his victories, he said finally. Sometimes that's all you can do, make the other side bleed enough that they think twice before hurting someone else. Clara nodded slowly, and Sam could see her drawing strength from his words. She was tougher than she looked, this runaway bride with fire in her eyes, tough enough to survive what was coming if they were smart and careful and more than a little lucky. As the sun set behind them, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Sam found himself thinking about the conversation with Parker. 3 months until Caldwell made his play for political power. 3 months to gather evidence, build a case, and find someone in federal authority willing to act on it. It wasn't much time, but it would have to be enough. Because if they failed, if Caldwell gained the protection of political office, then all the people he'd killed would have died for nothing, and all the people he might kill in the future would die without hope of justice. Sam Holloway had spent 5 years running from his failures, from the weight of responsibility and the pain of loss. But now, riding through the gathering darkness with a wounded woman who refused to surrender, and a preacher who burned for justice, he felt something he hadn't experienced since the war ended. He felt like he was finally fighting for something that mattered. The cabin came into view just as the last light faded from the western sky, its windows dark and unwelcoming. But Sam no longer saw it as a refuge from the world. Now it was just a way station, a place to rest and plan before the next stage of their journey. Tomorrow night they would ride for Socorro and whatever secrets lay hidden in the shadows of an old Spanish mission. They would follow the trail Clara's father had left behind, racing against time. and Caldwell's hunters to find the evidence that could bring a monster to justice, and if they were very lucky, very brave, and very careful, they might just live long. They left the cabin under a moonless sky, two shadows moving through the darkness with the practiced silence of people who understood that noise meant death. Sam had packed light ammunition, medical supplies, and enough food for 3 days. Everything else they would have to acquire along the way or do without. Clara sat her horse better than Sam had expected, though he could see the strain in her posture as they picked their way along the narrow trail that led south toward Socorro. The bullet wound was healing, but 8 days wasn't nearly enough time for her body to fully recover from the trauma. Still, she hadn't complained once during their preparations, and Sam found himself respecting her grit more with each passing hour. They rode in silence for the first few miles, letting their eyes adjust to the starlight and their ears tune themselves to the night sounds of the desert. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called to its mate, and the wind carried the faint scent of sage and creosote bush. It was the kind of night that made a man feel small against the vastness of the territory, but also part of something larger than himself. "Tell me about Father Miguel," Clara said softly, her voice barely carrying over the soft clop of hooves on packed earth. "Never met him," Sam replied. "But Parker seems to trust him, and that's good enough for me right now." What if he's wrong? What if this priest decides we're too dangerous to help? Sam had been wondering the same thing. They were asking a lot of a man they'd never met, shelter protection assistance in what amounted to a conspiracy against one of the territory's most powerful citizens. It was the kind of favor that could get a man killed if word got back to the wrong people. "Then we figure out another way," Sam said. "Your father was smart, Clara. If he hid evidence at the mission, he would have made sure it could be found without involving the clergy. We just need to get close enough to look." They rode through the night following game trails and dry creek beds that Sam knew from his years of solitary wandering. It was dangerous traveling in the dark. A horse could step in a prairie dog hole and break a leg, or a rider could miss a turn and end up lost in country where getting found meant getting dead. But it was safer than risking the main roads where Caldwell's men might be waiting. As dawn approached, they found shelter in a grove of cottonwoods near a seasonal creek that still held a trickle of water from the summer rains. Sam unsaddled the horses while Clara gathered brush to screen their camp from casual observation. They would rest here during the daylight hours, then continue south when darkness fell again. "How's your side?" Sam asked as Clara settled against a fallen log with a barely suppressed wince. "Better." She lied, then seemed to think better of it. "Hurts like hell if you want the truth, but I've had worse." Clara was quiet for a moment, staring at the thin stream of water that gurgled over the rocks. "When I was 16, I fell from a horse during roundup, broke 3 ribs and punctured a lung, spent 2 weeks in bed thinking I was going to die." "What kept you going?" "Stubbornness mostly, and the knowledge that if I died, Daddy would blame himself for the rest of his life." She looked up at Sam with those piercing green eyes. "Same thing that's keeping me going now, I suppose. Too stubborn to die and too angry to quit." Sam found himself smiling despite their circumstances. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." "Too late for that, Mr. Holloway. Anyone who helps me is automatically on Victor Caldwell's bad side, and that's about as bad as it gets in this territory." They slept in shifts during the day, Sam taking the first watch while Clara curled up in the shade of the cottonwoods. He positioned himself where he could see the approaches to their camp while remaining hidden from view, his rifle across his knees and his ears tuned for any sound that didn't belong. The desert was deceptively peaceful in the daylight, all golden sand and red rock under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. But Sam had learned not to trust the desert's tranquility. It was a harsh land that tested everything that tried to survive in it, and it had no patience for the weak or unwary. Around noon, the sound of distant hoofbeats brought him fully alert. Sam crouched lower behind his cover and studied the terrain through his field glasses, searching for movement among the sage and mesquite. After several minutes, he spotted them, 3 riders moving along a ridge about a mile to the north, too far away to identify, but close enough to be dangerous. Sam watched until the riders disappeared over the far side of the ridge, then waited another hour to make sure they weren't circling back. When he was satisfied they were gone, he woke Clara for her turn at watch. "Caldwell's men?" she asked, instantly alert despite having been deep asleep moments before. "Maybe, or just travelers, but we can't take chances." Clara nodded and took up position with Sam's spare pistol, a heavy Colt that looked oversized in her hands, but which she handled with surprising competence. "Daddy taught me to shoot when I was 12, she explained, seeing Sam's expression. "Said a woman in this territory needed to know how to protect herself. Smart man." "He was. I just wish he'd taught me how to spot a man like Victor Caldwell before it was too late." Sam settled down to rest, but sleep eluded him. Something about those riders bothered him. They'd been moving with purpose, not the casual pace of ordinary travelers, and they'd been heading south toward Socorro. When night fell, they resumed their journey with increased caution. Sam chose a more circuitous route that added hours to their travel time, but kept them well away from the main trails. They rode through country so desolate that even the Apache avoided it across alkali flats where nothing grew, and the only sound was the wind moaning through eroded rock formations. It was nearly dawn when they finally saw the lights of Socorro glimmering in the distance like fallen stars. The town sat in a valley beside the Rio Grande, its adobe buildings and church spires silhouetted against the lightening sky. There, Clara pointed to a bell tower that rose above the other structures. "San Miguel Mission. Daddy used to say it was the most beautiful building in the territory." Sam studied the mission through his field glasses. It was indeed beautiful, a classic Spanish colonial structure with thick walls, graceful arches, and a bell tower that seemed to reach toward heaven itself. But more importantly, it looked defensible. The walls were high and solid, the entrances few and easily watched. They approached Socorro from the east, skirting the main roads and staying in the cover of the cottonwoods that lined the river. Sam found a spot where they could observe the mission without being seen, then settled in to watch for signs of trouble. "Looks quiet," Clara observed. "Too quiet, maybe." Sam had learned to be suspicious of things that seemed too easy. "Caldwell's got to know your father had connections here. If I were him, I'd have men watching the mission." They waited until full daylight, studying the mission and the surrounding area for any sign of watchers. Sam counted the number of people coming and going, noted their clothing and behavior, looked for anything that seemed out of place. After 2 hours of observation, he was reasonably satisfied that if Caldwell had men watching the mission, they were either very well hidden or not there at all. "You're moved, Sam told Clara. "Parker said to approach Father Miguel directly, but we need to be smart about it." Clara studied the mission's layout, her eyes tracing the walls and entrances with the careful attention of someone whose life might depend on knowing every detail. "There," she pointed to a small gate in the eastern wall. "That leads to the mission garden. If Father Miguel is anything like the priests Daddy knew, he'll be out there early in the morning tending his vegetables." Sam nodded. It was a good plan. The garden gate would give them a way to approach without being seen from the main square, and it would allow them to speak with the priest privately before committing themselves to entering the mission proper. They waited until the sun was fully up, and the town was beginning to stir with morning activity. Then Clara made her way carefully through the cottonwoods toward the mission wall, while Sam kept watch from his concealed position. Through his field glasses, Sam saw Clara reach the garden gate and peer through the iron bars. After a moment, she pushed the gate open and stepped inside, disappearing behind the mission's walls. Sam counted the minutes, his hand never straying far from his rifle. If this was a trap, if Caldwell's men were waiting inside the mission, Clara would be walking into a situation she couldn't fight her way out of, and Sam would be too far away to help her. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Sam was beginning to consider charging across the open ground to the mission when Clara reappeared at the garden gate, accompanied by a tall figure in brown robes. Father Miguel was younger than Sam had expected, perhaps 50, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent in the desert sun. But it was his eyes that caught Sam's attention through the field glasses. They were intelligent, compassionate, and completely without fear. Clara gestured toward Sam's hiding place, and after a moment of apparent discussion, Father Miguel nodded. The priest opened the garden gate wider and made a subtle beckoning motion. Sam took a deep breath, checked his weapons one last time, and made his way across the open ground to the mission. If this was a trap, he was walking into it with his eyes wide open. But sometimes you had to take a leap of faith even when you weren't sure where you'd land. "Mr. Holloway." Father Miguel greeted him as he slipped through the garden gate. "Miss Whitfield has been telling me some very disturbing things about Victor Caldwell." I imagine she has, Father. The question is whether you believe them." Father Miguel closed the gate behind Sam and studied him with those intelligent eyes. "I've known Victor Caldwell for 15 years, Mr. Holloway. I've watched him build his fortune on the backs of desperate men, seen him destroy anyone who stood in his way. So yes, I believe Miss Whitfield's accusations. The only surprise is that someone finally has the courage to act on them." Sam felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. Parker had been right about the priest. Here was a man who couldn't be bought or intimidated. "Parker said you might be able to help us," Sam said. "Indeed, but first you need to see something." Father Miguel gestured toward the mission building, something that arrived here 3 weeks ago under very mysterious circumstances. They followed the priest through the garden and into the mission proper. The interior was cool and dim after the harsh desert sun filled with the scent of incense and old wood. Father Miguel led them through a corridor lined with religious paintings and into a small office behind the altar. "A man came to me in the middle of the night." Father Miguel began pulling a wooden box from beneath his desk. Said he had something that needed to be kept safe, something that could bring justice to the innocent and punishment to the guilty. He was dying, bleeding from internal injuries, but he insisted on completing his mission before he would accept help. Sam and Clara exchanged glances. "What did this man look like?" Clara asked. "Tall, thin, with gray hair, and the kind of hands that spoke of a lifetime of honest work." He called himself Thomas Whitfield. Clara gasped and nearly collapsed. Sam caught her arm, steadying her as the implications of Father Miguel's words sank in. "Daddy," she whispered, "but that's impossible. He died in a riding accident over a month ago." Father Miguel's expression was grave. "Miss Whitfield, I'm afraid your father's death was staged. He was very much alive when he came to me, though he died from his injuries 2 days later. He's buried in our cemetery under a simple cross marked only with his initials." The world seemed to tilt around Clara, and Sam could see her struggling to process this revelation. Her father hadn't died in an accident. He'd faked his death and gone into hiding only to die for real, while trying to protect the evidence he'd gathered against Caldwell. "He left this for you," Father Miguel continued, holding out the wooden box. "Said that if anyone came looking for Thomas Whitfield's daughter, I should give it to them, along with a message." Clara's hands shook as she took the box. It was plain pine, the kind used for shipping goods, but it felt heavy with more than just physical weight. "What was the message?" she asked. "He said to tell you that the desert roses bloom brightest after the storm and that courage is just fear that said its prayers." Clara's eyes filled with tears at the familiar words. "That's what he used to tell me when I was scared, when thunderstorms would wake me up at night, or when I had to do something difficult." She opened the box with trembling fingers, revealing a collection of documents, photographs, and what looked like military correspondence. On top of everything was a letter addressed to Clara in her father's careful handwriting. "My dearest daughter," Clara read aloud, her voice breaking. "If you are reading this, then Victor Caldwell has made good on his threats, and I am no longer able to protect you. But death, it seems, has given me an opportunity to provide you with something more valuable than protection, the truth." Sam moved closer as Clara continued reading, his eyes scanning the documents visible in the box. He could see official military seals, handwritten reports, and what looked like sworn statements from witnesses. "I discovered the truth about Victor's activities during the war, quite by accident," the letter continued. "A dying soldier came to me last winter, desperate to confess his sins before meeting his maker. He told me about Willow Creek, about the women and children who died there, about the orders Victor gave, and the pleasure he took in carrying them out." Sam felt his blood turn to ice. He'd suspected Caldwell was responsible for Willow Creek, but seeing it confirmed in black and white brought back all the guilt and rage he'd been carrying for 15 years. "The soldier gave me names, dates, locations. I began investigating, and what I found was worse than I could have imagined. Victor Caldwell didn't just commit war crimes, he made a business of them. He would identify wealthy Union sympathizers, accuse them of collaboration, then massacre entire families and claim their property for the Confederate cause." Clara's voice had grown steadier as she read, her grief transforming into something harder and more focused. But Victor was too clever to simply steal. He documented everything, kept meticulous records of his activities, believing they would prove his loyalty to the Confederate cause. What he didn't anticipate was that those same records would damn him if they fell into the wrong hands. Father Miguel leaned forward. Your father spent months gathering evidence, tracking down witnesses, building an unshakable case against Caldwell. He was planning to take it to federal authorities when Caldwell discovered what he was doing. How? Sam asked. One of the witnesses got scared and went to Caldwell, hoping to buy his safety by betraying Thomas. Caldwell responded by killing the witness and putting a price on your father's head. Thomas barely escaped with his life, but he managed to save the evidence. Clara reached the end of the letter and looked up at Sam with tears streaming down her face. He says the evidence is all here, along with instructions for getting it to people who can act on it. Names, addresses, contacts in the federal government who can't be bought by Victor's money. Sam examined the contents of the box more carefully. The evidence was overwhelming: military dispatches detailing Caldwell's activities, sworn statements from survivors, even photographs of mass graves at Willow Creek and other sites. It was enough to hang Caldwell 10 times over if they could get it to the right people. There's more, Father Miguel said quietly. Your father wasn't the only one gathering evidence against Caldwell. There's a network of people, survivors, witnesses, federal investigators who have been building a case for years. They've been waiting for someone brave enough to come forward with proof. Who are they? Clara asked. Father Miguel pulled out another document from the box. Federal Marshal James Morrison, based out of Santa Fe, Captain William Hayes of the Army's Criminal Investigation Division, and a territorial prosecutor named Elizabeth Warren, who's been fighting corruption for years. Sam studied the names. These weren't local officials who could be bought or intimidated. They were federal authorities with the power and jurisdiction to bring Caldwell to justice. The question, Father Miguel continued, is how to get this evidence to them without Caldwell intercepting it. He has spies everywhere, and he's not above murdering federal officials if they become too much of a threat. Clara was already thinking ahead. We need to divide the evidence, make copies, send them through different channels. If one gets intercepted, the others might get through. Sam nodded. Smart. But it'll take time, and time is something we don't have much of. Caldwell's bound to figure out we're here eventually. Actually, Father Miguel said with a slight smile, you may have more time than you think. Victor Caldwell is currently in Santa Fe meeting with territorial officials about his political campaign. He won't be back for at least a week. How do you know that? Because he requested a meeting with the bishop to discuss his potential candidacy. The church's endorsement carries weight in territorial politics, though I'm afraid His Excellency was unimpressed by Mr. Caldwell's character. Sam felt a surge of hope. A week wasn't much, but it might be enough to get copies of the evidence to multiple federal authorities and build a case strong enough to survive Caldwell's inevitable counterattack. We'll need help, Sam said. People we can trust to carry messages, make copies, act as witnesses if necessary. You have it, Father Miguel replied without hesitation. The church has resources throughout the territory, and many of us have been waiting for an opportunity to bring Victor Caldwell to justice. Clara was already organizing the documents, her mind working with the precision of someone who understood the magnitude of what they were attempting. We'll need to prioritize the evidence, decide what goes to whom and in what order. Sam picked up one of the photographs, a grim image of bodies lying in the ruins of what had once been a homestead. The sight brought back memories of his own failures, the people he'd been unable to save during the war. Mr. Holloway. Clara's voice seemed to come from far away. Are you all right? Sam realized he'd been staring at the photograph for several minutes, lost in the dark maze of his own guilt. This one, he said, holding up the image. This is the Henderson place, about 5 miles east of Willow Creek. I found them 3 days after the attack. You were there? I was the commanding officer responsible for protecting that area. These people died on my watch, and I never knew who was responsible. Sam's voice was tight with suppressed emotion. Now I do. Father Miguel placed a gentle hand on Sam's shoulder. The past cannot be changed, my son, but the future can still be shaped by the choices we make today. Sam nodded, forcing himself to focus on the present. The dead deserved justice, but the living needed protection. And right now, Clara needed him to be strong. They spent the rest of the day planning their next moves. Father Miguel provided them with names and locations of trusted allies throughout the territory, while Clara organized the evidence into multiple packages for distribution. Sam studied maps of the region, plotting routes to Santa Fe and other locations where they could find federal authorities. As evening approached, Father Miguel led them to a hidden room beneath the mission's altar, accessible through a concealed door that had been built by Spanish colonists centuries earlier. "You'll be safe here," the priest assured them. "This room has sheltered fugitives from Apache raids, Mexican revolutionaries, and Confederate deserters. The walls are thick enough to muffle sound, and there are multiple escape routes if you need them." The hidden chamber was larger than Sam had expected, with stone walls and a vaulted ceiling that spoke of skilled craftsmanship. It was furnished simply but comfortably, with beds, a table, and even a small shrine where travelers could pray for safe passage. "Father," Clara said, as they prepared to settle in for the night, "why are you helping us? You could be putting the entire mission at risk." Father Miguel was quiet for a moment, his eyes reflecting the light of the oil lamps that illuminated the chamber. "Because, my child, there comes a time when silence becomes complicity. I have watched Victor Caldwell destroy too many lives, corrupt too many institutions, spread too much fear and suffering. If God has given me an opportunity to help stop him, then I must take it, regardless of the personal cost." Sam found himself respecting the priest's quiet courage. It took a special kind of bravery to stand up to a man like Caldwell, knowing the consequences could be fatal. That night, as Clara slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Sam kept vigil in the hidden chamber, his rifle across his knees and his mind working through their options. They had the evidence they needed to destroy Caldwell, but getting it to the right people would require careful planning and no small amount of luck. Outside, the mission bells tolled the hours, their bronze voices carrying across the desert night like a promise of justice, deferred but not denied. And in the morning, Sam knew they would begin the most dangerous phase of their quest, the race to expose Victor Caldwell's crimes before he could silence them forever. But for now, in the safety of the hidden chamber beneath San Miguel Mission, Sam allowed himself to hope that they might actually succeed. The evidence was real, the allies were in place, and for the first time since this all began, victory seemed possible. The desert roses were blooming at last, and their beauty was worth every thorn that had torn them along the way. The morning brought news that shattered their carefully laid plans like glass against stone. Father Miguel descended into the hidden chamber just after dawn, his face grave and his hands trembling as he clutched a telegram that had arrived during the night. "What is it?" Clara asked, immediately alert to the priest's distress. "Victor Caldwell." Father Miguel said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "He's returning to the territory earlier than expected. This telegram is from Bishop Martinez in Santa Fe. Caldwell cut short his meetings and left the capital yesterday morning with a company of armed men." Sam felt his blood turn cold. How many men? At least 20, possibly more. They're riding hard for Socorro, and they should arrive by midday. Clara's face went pale. "He knows we're here." "It appears so. The bishop's message suggests that Caldwell received urgent intelligence about your location." Father Miguel crumpled the telegram in his fist. "Someone betrayed us." Sam was already moving, checking his weapons and gathering their supplies. 20 armed men was more than he could handle in a straight fight, especially with Clara still recovering from her wound. They needed to run, and they needed to run now. "The evidence!" Clara said, her hands flying to the wooden box. "We can't let him get it." "We won't," Sam assured her. But his mind was racing through options, none of them good. They could try to escape Socorro before Caldwell arrived, but his men might already be watching the roads. They could attempt to hide in the mission, but 20 determined gunmen could tear the place apart, stone by stone. Father Miguel was thinking along the same lines. "There's another way," he said slowly. "Dangerous, but it might work." "I'm listening," Sam replied. "The old mine shaft network under the town. They were dug by Spanish colonists centuries ago, connected to natural caves that run for miles underground. Most people have forgotten they exist, but they connect to the mission's foundation and emerge in several locations around the valley." Clara looked up from where she was frantically organizing the evidence into smaller packages. "You want us to go underground?" "It's the only way to avoid Caldwell's men completely. The main tunnel runs northwest for about 3 miles before emerging near the river crossing. From there you could make your way to the railroad depot at San Antonio." Sam considered this. Underground travel would be slow and dangerous, cave-ins, bad air, the possibility of getting lost in the dark, but it would put them completely beyond Caldwell's reach until they reached the surface again. "How do we access these tunnels?" he asked. Father Miguel led them to the far corner of the chamber, where what looked like a solid stone wall actually concealed another hidden door. This passage was built to connect with the mine system in case the mission ever needed to be evacuated. It hasn't been used in 50 years, but it should still be passable. The priest pushed against a seemingly random stone, and a section of the wall swung inward with the grinding sound of ancient mechanisms. Beyond lay a narrow tunnel that disappeared into absolute darkness. "I'll give you supplies and directions," Father Miguel continued, "but you'll need to move quickly. Once Caldwell arrives and finds you gone, he'll search everywhere, including down here." Clara finished dividing the evidence into 4 separate packages, each containing enough documentation to damn Caldwell if it reached the right hands. "Father, can you get one of these packages to Marshal Morrison in Santa Fe and another to Captain Hayes?" "Of course. I've trusted messengers who can ride within the hour." Sam took one of the remaining packages and handed the 4th to Clara. "We'll take these to the federal prosecutor in Albuquerque and the territorial governor in Santa Fe. If we split up the evidence 4 ways, Caldwell can't stop all of it from reaching its destination." "We're not splitting up," Clara said firmly. "I won't leave you to face this alone." "Clara, be reasonable. You're still hurt and—" "No." Her voice cut through his protest like a blade. "We started this together and we'll finish it together. Besides, you need me. I know the people on Daddy's list know who can be trusted and who can't." Sam wanted to argue, but he could see the determination in her eyes. Clara Whitfield had come too far and sacrificed too much to be sidelined now, no matter how dangerous the road ahead. Father Miguel provided them with lanterns, rope food, and water for 3 days underground. He also gave Sam a detailed map of the tunnel system, hand-drawn on old parchment that looked like it had been created by Spanish explorers. "The main passage is marked in red," the priest explained. "Stay on it no matter what side tunnels you encounter. Some of the older shafts are unstable, and others lead to dead ends or underground rivers." "What about air?" Clara asked, practical as always. The Spanish were master engineers. They built ventilation shafts every few hundred yards connected to natural chimneys in the rock. "You should have breathable air throughout your journey." As they prepared to enter the tunnel, the sound of horses and shouting voices drifted down from the mission above. Caldwell had arrived, and from the commotion it sounded like he'd brought even more men than the bishop had reported. "Go," Father Miguel urged, pushing them toward the hidden passage. "I'll seal this door behind you and pray that God watches over your journey." Sam lit their first lantern and stepped into the tunnel, his rifle ready despite knowing it would do little good in the confined space. Clara followed close behind, her hand resting on the package of evidence like a talisman. The passage was narrow and low, forcing them to move in single file with their heads bent. The walls were carved from solid rock smoothed by centuries of patient work, and the floor had been paved with flat stones that still held firm after all these years. Behind them, Father Miguel's voice echoed briefly as he sealed the entrance. "Vaya con Dios, my children. May justice light your path." Then they were alone in the darkness with only the flickering flame of their lantern to hold back the pressing weight of the earth above. They walked in silence for the first hour, save for the soft echo of their footsteps and the occasional drip of water from somewhere in the darkness ahead. The tunnel was remarkably well preserved, a testament to Spanish engineering and the dry climate that had protected it from decay. "How are you holding up?" Sam asked quietly, his voice seeming unnaturally loud in the confined space. "Better than I expected," Clara replied. "It's almost peaceful down here, like the whole world above has stopped existing for a while." Sam understood what she meant. There was something oddly comforting about the tunnel's simplicity. No horizon to watch for enemies. No weather to worry about, just the path ahead and the steady rhythm of walking. It was almost meditative if you could ignore the crushing weight of stone overhead. They reached the first ventilation shaft after 90 minutes of steady walking. The narrow chimney disappeared upward into darkness, but fresh air flowed down it in a steady stream, carrying with it the scent of sage and desert sunshine. "Amazing," Clara mused, looking up the shaft. "They built this 500 years ago, and it still works perfectly." "The Spanish didn't build things to last a generation," Sam agreed. "They built them to last forever." They rested for a few minutes, sharing water and checking Father Miguel's map. According to the priest's notations, they were making good time. The tunnel ran straight and level for another mile before beginning a gradual ascent toward the surface. As they resumed walking, Clara began to talk, her voice soft but carrying clearly in the enclosed space. I keep thinking about what Daddy went through in his last weeks. Knowing Victor was hunting him, knowing he was dying from his injuries, but still determined to get the evidence to safety. He was a brave man. He was a stubborn man, Clara corrected with a sad smile. Mama always said Daddy would rather die than admit he was wrong about something. I suppose that stubbornness is what kept him going long enough to hide the evidence. Sam could hear the grief in her voice mixed with pride and a fierce determination that reminded him of his own father. He'd be proud of you, Clara. What you're doing takes the same kind of courage. Does it? Sometimes I feel like I'm just running scared, reacting to things instead of taking control. Running toward danger to save other people isn't the same as running away from it to save yourself. Your father knew the difference, and so do I. They walked on through the unchanging darkness, their lantern casting dancing shadows on the tunnel walls. The steady rhythm of their footsteps became almost hypnotic, and Sam found his mind drifting to memories of other journeys, other missions where everything had depended on reaching the right place at the right time. Sam, Clara said suddenly, using his first name for the first time, can I ask you something personal? Shoot. When you found me in the desert, what made you stop? You could have kept riding, pretended you never saw me. It would have been safer. Sam was quiet for a long time, considering how to answer. The truth was complicated, wrapped up in guilt and loneliness and a desperate need to matter to someone again. I've spent 5 years trying to forget the people I couldn't save during the war, he said finally. Soldiers under my command, civilians caught in the crossfire, families like the ones at Willow Creek. I came to the desert thinking I could outrun that weight, but it followed me anyway. And when you saw me, I saw a chance to save someone instead of losing them. Maybe it was selfish, but I needed that chance more than I needed safety. Clara was quiet for several steps. Then, it wasn't selfish. It was human. We all need to matter to someone, need to know our lives have made a difference. Your father mattered, Sam said. What he did, the evidence he gathered, the courage he showed, it's going to save lives, including yours. And what about you? Do you think you matter? The question hit Sam like a physical blow. For 5 years, he'd been telling himself that he was worthless, that his failures in the war had made him a burden rather than a blessing to the world. But looking at Clara, now seeing the strength and determination he'd helped nurture, Sam felt something shift inside him. Maybe, he said quietly, maybe I'm starting to. They reached a junction where 3 tunnels branched off from the main passage. Father Miguel's map clearly marked the correct route, but Sam took a moment to examine the other options. One led upward toward what the map labeled as Old Spanish Fort, while another descended toward an underground river. Escape routes, Clara observed, in case we need them. Let's hope we don't. They continued along the main tunnel, which had begun to slope upward as the priest had promised. The air remained fresh, though Sam noticed it was getting warmer as they approached the surface. According to the map, they should reach the exit point within another hour. That's when they heard the voices. Sam immediately doused their lantern, plunging them into absolute darkness. The voices were distant and muffled, but they were definitely coming from somewhere ahead in the tunnel. Caldwell's men, Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. Sam strained his ears, trying to make out words. The voices seemed to be moving, sometimes louder, sometimes fainter, as if the speakers were searching for something. Could be, or could be miners who know about these tunnels. Sam felt for Clara's hand in the darkness, squeezing it reassuringly. Either way, we need to be careful. They moved forward slowly, feeling their way along the tunnel wall with their free hands. The voices grew clearer as they approached, and Sam's heart sank as he recognized the harsh tones of men accustomed to violence. Told you these tunnels connected to the mission, one voice was saying. If they're down here, we'll find them. Lot of ground to cover, another voice replied. Could take days to search all these passages. Caldwell wants them found, so we keep looking. He's offering $1,000 to whoever brings him the woman alive and $500 for proof the man is dead. Sam felt Clara tense beside him. The bounty on their heads was larger than most men made in 2 years, enough to motivate every gunman and treasure hunter in the territory. The voices were getting closer, accompanied now by the flickering light of torches or lanterns. Sam counted at least 3 distinct speakers, possibly more. Fighting in the narrow tunnel would be suicide, but if they tried to retreat, they might be heard. "This way," Sam whispered, remembering one of the side passages they'd seen earlier. He guided Clara back down the tunnel until they reached the junction, then led her into the passage marked as leading to the old Spanish fort. This tunnel was narrower and older than the main passage, with rough-hewn walls that spoke of more primitive construction, but it sloped upward steeply, suggesting it might offer another route to the surface. Behind them, the voices of Caldwell's men grew fainter as they continued along the main tunnel. Sam and Clara climbed steadily through the darkness, guided by touch and instinct, until they saw a faint glimmer of light ahead. The tunnel emerged into a natural cave system carved into the mountainside. Daylight filtered down through cracks in the ceiling, revealing a space that had once been fortified with stone walls and wooden platforms. "The Spanish fort," Clara breathed, looking around at the ancient defenses. "Daddy told me stories about this place. The colonists built it to guard the approaches to Socorro from Apache raids." Sam studied their surroundings. The fort was positioned on a high ridge overlooking the valley, with commanding views in all directions. More importantly, it offered multiple routes down the mountainside, any of which could get them away from Caldwell's search parties. "We can't stay here long," Sam said, checking his watch, "but we need to figure out our next move. Those men in the tunnel will eventually realize we're not down there." Clara was examining Father Miguel's map in the improved light. "According to this, there's a trail that leads down to the river crossing about 2 miles north of town. From there we could follow the railroad tracks to San Antonio." "How long would that take?" "On foot. 2 days, maybe 3, but we'd be exposed the whole way, and Caldwell probably has men watching the railroad." Sam moved to one of the cave openings and studied the valley below through his field glasses. Socorro looked peaceful in the afternoon sun, but he could see unusual activity around the mission horses' armed men, the systematic search of every building and street. "He's turning the whole town upside down," Sam reported. "Whatever information led him here, he's taking it seriously." "Sam," Clara said quietly, and something in her tone made him turn around immediately. She was standing near the back of the cave, staring at something carved into the rock wall. As Sam approached, he could see it was a message etched deeply into the stone in careful Spanish script. "What does it say?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "It's a message from my great-grandfather. He was one of the Spanish colonists who built this fort." She traced the letters with her finger as she translated. "Here lies the treasure of the Whitfield family, not gold or silver, but the truth that will set the innocent free." Sam felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cave's temperature. "Your great-grandfather left something here. It looks like it. But this carving is old Sam, very old. How could he have known?" Clara trailed off as the implications sank in. Her family's fight against corruption and injustice went back generations, perhaps centuries. Her father hadn't been the first Whitfield to gather evidence against powerful men who abused their authority. "Show me," Sam said. Clara examined the carving more carefully, running her hands over the rock surface. After several minutes, she found what she was looking for, a section of the wall that looked solid but gave slightly under pressure. The hidden chamber behind the false wall was small but dry, protected from the elements by careful engineering. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather that had preserved them through the centuries, were documents that made Sam's breath catch in his throat. "Land grants," Clara said, examining the papers with growing excitement. "Property deeds, mining claims, water rights, all signed by Spanish colonial authorities. And look at this." She held up a map that showed the valley around Socorro in exquisite detail, with notations in multiple hands spanning what looked like 2 centuries. But it was the most recent additions that caught Sam's attention, notes in English, written in a hand he recognized from the letter Clara's father had left. "Your father knew about this place," Sam realized. "He was continuing work that started with your great-grandfather." "More than that," Clara said, her voice rising with excitement. "Look at these property boundaries. According to these documents, Victor Caldwell doesn't own half the land he claims. These Spanish grants predate his American purchases by 300 years. Sam studied the documents more carefully. If Clara was right, they had stumbled onto something that could destroy Caldwell, even if the war crimes evidence never reached federal authorities. Land fraud on this scale would be a federal offense, and it would give them leverage they hadn't possessed before. "This changes everything," Sam said. "With these documents and your father's evidence, we can attack Caldwell from multiple directions. Even if he manages to suppress one case, the others will destroy him." Clara was already organizing the new evidence, adding it to the packages they'd prepared at the mission. "We need to get this to someone who can act on it immediately. Someone beyond Caldwell's reach. Federal court in Denver," Sam suggested. "Or maybe the territorial capital. No, somewhere closer, somewhere we can reach before Caldwell realizes what we've found." Clara studied the map of the valley, her mind working rapidly. "The Army post at Fort Craig. It's only a day's ride south, and they have telegraph connections to Washington." Sam nodded. Fort Craig was a good choice. Military authorities couldn't be bought as easily as civilian officials, and they had the resources to protect evidence and witnesses. They spent another hour organizing their discoveries and planning their route to the fort. The ancient documents would need careful handling, but they were too valuable to leave behind. Combined with her father's evidence, they represented the complete destruction of Victor Caldwell's empire. As the sun began to set, Sam made one final survey of the valley below. Caldwell's men were still searching, but their efforts seemed to be concentrated around the town itself. The mountainside routes remained unguarded, giving Sam and Clara a window of opportunity. "Time to go," he said, shouldering his pack. "We'll follow the ridge south until we're well clear of Socorro, then drop down to the river and follow it toward Fort Craig." Clara took one last look around the ancient fort, then carefully sealed the hidden chamber where her family's legacy had waited so patiently for discovery. "Ready?" she said, but Sam could hear the emotion in her voice. This place represented more than just evidence. It was a connection to ancestors who had fought the same fight against corruption and injustice, proof that the Whitfield family's courage ran deeper than any one generation. They left the fort as darkness fell, following animal trails and game paths that avoided the main routes through the mountains. Behind them, the lights of Socorro twinkled in the valley like fallen stars, while ahead lay the uncertain promise of justice and the dangerous journey required to claim it. The evidence they carried could destroy Victor Caldwell completely, but only if they lived long enough to deliver it. And with every step they took away from the safety of the ancient fort, Sam knew they were walking deeper into the most dangerous phase of their quest. Caldwell would not give up easily, and desperate men took desperate chances. Before this was over, Sam realized one of them would be dead, and he was determined to make sure it wasn't Clara. The mountain trail wound through stands of pine and aspen, their leaves whispering secrets in the night wind, as Sam and Clara made their way south toward Fort Craig. They had been walking for 3 hours since leaving the Spanish fort, moving carefully through terrain that could break an ankle or conceal an ambush with equal ease. "Wait," Clara whispered suddenly, her hand touching Sam's arm. They froze, listening to the darkness around them. At first, Sam heard nothing but the usual night sounds: an owl calling from somewhere ahead, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the distant howl of a coyote. Then he caught it, the soft jingle of spurs and bridle leather, the muffled sound of horses picking their way carefully up the mountainside. "How many?" Clara breathed. Sam strained his ears, trying to separate individual sounds from the general noise. 4, maybe 5 riders, still a ways below us, but they're definitely following our trail. And they had been careful to avoid leaving obvious tracks, but Sam knew that determined trackers could follow even the faintest signs, especially if they had Apache guides or experienced frontiersmen in their party. Caldwell had the resources to hire the best, and a $1,000 bounty would motivate even the most skilled hunters. "This way," Sam whispered, leading Clara off the main trail and into a grove of ancient pines whose thick canopy would hide them from view. They crouched in the darkness, their backs against the massive trunk of a tree that had been growing when Spanish explorers first entered this valley. The sound of approaching horses grew steadily louder, accompanied now by the low murmur of voices. "Trail's getting fresher," one voice said, close enough now that Sam could make out individual words. "Can't be more than an hour ahead of us." "Caldwell wants them alive if possible," another voice replied. "Especially the woman. He's got questions for her before she dies. Clara's hand found Sam's in the darkness, her fingers cold despite the warm night. Sam squeezed reassuringly, though his own pulse was racing. 5 riders meant 5 guns, 5 men trained in violence and motivated by more money than most would see in a lifetime. What if they make it to Fort Craig? A third voice asked. They won't, the first speaker replied with cold confidence. We've got men watching every approach to the fort, and even if they somehow get past us, Caldwell's got friends in the army. That evidence will disappear before it ever reaches the telegraph office. Sam felt his heart sink. They had been counting on the military's independence from local corruption, but Caldwell's influence apparently reached further than they had imagined. Still, they had to try the alternative, was letting a monster continue his reign of terror, unopposed. The riders passed within 50 yards of their hiding place, their voices fading as they continued up the trail. Sam waited until he could no longer hear them before moving, leading Clara deeper into the forest where they could talk without fear of being overheard. We need a new plan, he said quietly. If Caldwell has people watching Fort Craig, we're walking into a trap. Clara was studying the documents they carried, her face barely visible in the starlight, filtering through the trees. What about the railroad? We could try to get these papers to Denver or Santa Fe directly. Same problem. Caldwell's had time to position men at every obvious destination. Sam rubbed his jaw, thinking hard. We need to go somewhere he wouldn't expect, somewhere he doesn't have influence. The territorial capital, too obvious. He'll have bought or intimidated half the officials there. Clara was quiet for a moment, then her face brightened with an idea that Sam immediately didn't like. Albuquerque, she said. There's a federal prosecutor there, Elizabeth Warren. According to Daddy's notes, she's been investigating territorial corruption for years, and she's not afraid of powerful men. Sam knew the name. Elizabeth Warren had a reputation as an honest prosecutor in a territory where honesty was often fatal. But Albuquerque was 100 miles north through country that Caldwell's men would be watching. It's a long way, Sam said, and dangerous. Everything's dangerous now, Clara replied. But Daddy trusted her enough to include her name in his list of contacts. If anyone can act on this evidence, it's her. Sam considered their options. They could try to hide in the mountains until Caldwell gave up his search. But that could take weeks or months, and they didn't have enough supplies for an extended stay. They could attempt to leave the territory entirely, but that would mean abandoning all the people Caldwell would continue to victimize. All right, he decided. Albuquerque it is. But we go smart, avoid the main roads, travel at night, assume everyone we meet is working for Caldwell. They spent the rest of the night moving through the forest, putting distance between themselves and their pursuers while staying off any trail that could be easily followed. By dawn, they had reached a high ridge that offered commanding views of the valley below. Through his field glasses, Sam could see riders moving along the main road toward Fort Craig. Confirmation that Caldwell had indeed anticipated their destination. But he also noticed something else that made him smile grimly. What is it? Clara asked, seeing his expression. Caldwell's made a mistake, Sam replied, handing her the glasses. Look at how his men are positioned. Clara studied the valley for several minutes, then lowered the glasses with understanding. They're watching the obvious routes, but they've left the northern approaches completely unguarded. Exactly. Caldwell's thinking like a rich man, not a soldier. He's deploying his forces to protect the places he thinks matter, but he's forgotten that sometimes the best strategy is to go where your enemy isn't looking. They found shelter in a cave system that afternoon, hidden among the rocks where they could rest without fear of discovery. Clara used the time to organize the evidence again, making sure the most damaging documents were distributed among multiple packages. Sam, she said as they shared a meal of hardtack and dried meat. What happens after we deliver this evidence, assuming we succeed? Caldwell goes to trial, probably hangs for his war crimes. His empire collapses and all the people he's been victimizing get their lives back. And us. What happens to us? Sam had been wondering the same thing. For weeks now, their lives had been defined by this single purpose: gathering evidence, staying alive, seeking justice. But once that purpose was fulfilled, what then? I don't know, he admitted. I suppose you'll go back to your life, whatever's left of it after all this. Clara was quiet for a long time, staring out at the desert landscape visible through the cave entrance. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but determined. "I don't think I can go back, Sam. Too much has changed. I've changed." "How so?" "Before all this started, I was just drifting through life, letting other people make decisions for me. My father chose my education. Victor chose my marriage. Society chose my role as a proper young lady. I never really chose anything for myself." Sam could hear the strength in her voice, the confidence that had grown through weeks of danger and hardship. "And now I know what I'm capable of. I know I can make hard choices, face danger, fight for what's right." Clara met his eyes. "I don't want to go back to being helpless." "You were never helpless, Clara. You just didn't know your own strength." They resumed traveling after sunset, following game trails and ridgelines that kept them well away from the main roads. The going was slow and treacherous in the darkness, but it was safer than risking the open country where Caldwell's men could spot them from miles away. On the second night, they had their first real scare. They were descending into a narrow canyon when Sam heard the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked somewhere in the darkness ahead. He immediately pushed Clara behind a boulder and raised his own weapon, though he couldn't see any targets in the black shadows of the canyon walls. "That's far enough," a voice called out. "You folks just stay right where you are." Sam's mind raced through options. The voice sounded local, not like one of Caldwell's hired guns, but that didn't necessarily mean they were safe. Bounty hunters came in all varieties, and $1,000 could buy a lot of cooperation from honest citizens. "We're just travelers," Sam called back. "Don't want any trouble." "Travelers don't usually move through Dead Man's Canyon in the middle of the night," the voice replied, "unless they got good reason to avoid being seen." Sam could hear at least two other people moving in the darkness, trying to flank their position. These weren't casual bandits. They moved with military precision and discipline. "You wouldn't happen to be the folks Victor Caldwell's looking for, would you?" the voice continued. "Heard there's good money for information about a man and woman heading north." Clara touched Sam's arm and whispered something he couldn't quite hear. Then, to his amazement, she stood up and stepped out from behind the boulder. "Jimmy Prescott, is that you?" she called out. The movement in the darkness stopped abruptly. After a moment of stunned silence, the original voice responded with obvious surprise. "Miss Clara? Clara Whitfield. What in the hell are you doing out here?" Sam watched in amazement as a figure emerged from the shadows, a young man in his 20s with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. He was followed by two other men, all of them carrying rifles but no longer pointing them at Sam and Clara. "Jimmy was one of Daddy's ranch hands," Clara explained to Sam, "before Victor forced Daddy to sell the ranch to pay his debts." "Miss Clara, we heard you were dead," Jimmy said, his voice filled with relief and concern. "Word came down that Caldwell's men found your body in the desert." "Victor's lie," Clara replied. "I'm very much alive and I need to stay that way long enough to see him brought to justice." Jimmy's expression hardened at the mention of Caldwell's name. "That bastard destroyed a lot of good people when he took over your daddy's ranch. Turned most of us off without pay, kept the best horses and cattle for himself." "I'm sorry, Jimmy. I know Daddy would have made things right if he could have." "Wasn't your daddy's fault, Miss Clara? We all knew Caldwell was cheating him, but your daddy was too honest to see it until it was too late." Sam stepped forward, still wary but beginning to hope they had found allies rather than enemies. "You men know this country pretty well." "Better than most," Jimmy replied. "We've been living rough since Caldwell threw us off the ranch doing whatever work we can find. Know every trail and hiding place between here and Santa Fe." "We're trying to get to Albuquerque," Clara said. "We have evidence that could destroy Caldwell, but his men are watching all the main routes." Jimmy and his companions exchanged glances, then Jimmy nodded slowly. "We can help you get there. Got our own scores to settle with Caldwell, and we know ways through the mountains that his fancy hired guns never heard of." "Why should we trust you?" Sam asked, still cautious, despite Clara's obvious relief. "Because, mister, if we wanted to turn you in for that bounty, we'd have done it already instead of talking." Jimmy's voice carried the ring of honest conviction. "Besides, any enemy of Victor Caldwell is a friend of ours." They spent the next hour sharing information and planning their route to Albuquerque. Jimmy and his men had been living as outlaws since losing their jobs. But they were good men driven to desperation by Caldwell's greed. They knew the territory intimately and had been successfully avoiding Caldwell's search parties for weeks. "There's an old mining road that runs through the Sandia Mountains," Jimmy explained, sketching a rough map in the dirt. "Hasn't been used in years, but it's still passable if you know where to look. Comes out about 10 miles east of Albuquerque, close enough to reach the federal courthouse without being seen." "How long would it take?" Clara asked. 3 days, maybe 4 if we're careful. It's rough country and we'll need to move slow to avoid leaving tracks." Sam studied the route Jimmy had outlined. It would take them well away from any area where Caldwell might expect them to travel through mountains that were largely uninhabited except for the occasional prospector or hermit. "What about supplies?" Sam asked. "Got a cache hidden about halfway along the route." One of Jimmy's companions spoke up. "Food, ammunition, medical supplies. Should be enough to get us through." Clara looked at Sam, her eyes asking for his decision. After a moment's consideration, Sam nodded. "All right, but we do this careful. If this is a trap, it's not a trap," Jimmy said firmly. "You got my word on that, and the word of Thomas Whitfield's daughter means everything to us." They traveled through the night and into the following day, moving single file along trails so faint they were barely visible even in daylight. Jimmy led the way with the confidence of someone who had spent years learning every secret of this harsh landscape. The Sandia Mountains were different from the desert country Sam was accustomed to, higher, cooler, covered with forests of pine and oak that provided excellent cover, but also concealed potential dangers. It was country where a man could disappear completely either by choice or by accident. On the second day, they had proof that their trust in Jimmy had been well placed. They were resting in a grove of ancient oaks when Jimmy suddenly held up his hand for silence. In the distance, Sam could hear the sound of many horses moving through the forest with the kind of organized precision that suggested military or law enforcement. "Caldwell's men," Jimmy whispered. "Big group, maybe 20 riders. They're following the main trail about a mile south of us." Sam raised his field glasses and caught glimpses of armed men moving through the trees below their position. They were well equipped and professional looking, the kind of hired guns that money could buy in any frontier town. "They're heading for the pass at Tijeras Canyon," Jimmy continued. "Probably figure you'll try to come through there to reach Albuquerque." "How did they know to look here?" Clara asked. "Someone talked," Sam said grimly, "or Caldwell's smarter than we gave him credit for." They waited until the search party had passed before resuming their journey, but the encounter left everyone on edge. Caldwell's reach was longer than they had imagined, and his resources seemed unlimited. That night, as they camped in a hidden valley near the old mining cache, Clara pulled Sam aside for a private conversation. "Sam, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice serious. "About what happens when we reach Albuquerque." "What about it?" "Elizabeth Warren, the federal prosecutor. I've never actually met her, only heard Daddy talk about her. What if she won't see us? What if she doesn't believe our evidence?" Sam had been wondering the same thing. They were putting all their hopes on a woman they'd never met, betting their lives that she would be both willing and able to act on the evidence they carried. "Then we find another way," he said. "We don't give up until justice is done." Clara nodded, but Sam could see the doubt in her eyes. They had come so far, sacrificed so much, risked everything on the chance that somewhere in this corrupt territory there was still someone who cared about truth and justice. "There's something else," Clara continued, "about us, about what happens after all this is over." Sam felt his heart skip a beat. He had been trying not to think about the future, afraid to hope for something beyond their mission of justice. "Clara, no, let me say this." She took his hands in hers, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "These past weeks fighting beside you, depending on you learning to trust you, it's shown me what real partnership can be. Not the kind of marriage Victor would have forced on me, but something real and equal, and chosen." Sam felt something break open inside his chest, years of loneliness and guilt washing away in the face of her honesty. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that when this is over, I'd like to find out what we could build together, if you're willing." Sam pulled her close, feeling the rightness of it in his bones. "I've been alone for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to matter to someone. You matter to me, Sam Holloway, more than I thought possible." They held each other in the darkness, two people who had found something worth fighting for in each other, as well as in their quest for justice. It was a moment of peace and hope in the middle of a war that had already claimed too many lives. The next morning brought them within sight of Albuquerque. The territorial capital spread across the valley below them like a collection of scattered toys, its adobe buildings and church spires looking impossibly small from their mountain vantage point. Somewhere in that maze of streets and structures was Elizabeth Warren, the federal prosecutor who might be their salvation or their final disappointment. "Federal courthouse is on 2nd Street, Jimmy said, pointing to a substantial building near the center of town. "Warren's office is on the 3rd floor if the rumors are true." Sam studied the town through his field glasses, looking for signs of unusual activity or surveillance. The streets seemed normal for a territorial capital, wagons and riders moving about, their business people walking between buildings, children playing in the dusty squares. "Looks quiet," he reported, "but that doesn't mean Caldwell doesn't have people watching." "How do we approach this?" Clara asked. Sam considered their options. They could try to enter the town openly, but that would make them visible to any watchers Caldwell might have posted. They could attempt to sneak in after dark, but that would mean waiting another day and risking discovery. "We split up," he decided. "Jimmy and his men create a distraction on the south side of town, draw attention away from the courthouse. You and I go in from the north, get to Warren's office as fast as possible." "What kind of distraction?" Jimmy asked. Sam smiled grimly. "The kind that involves making a lot of noise and giving Caldwell's men something to chase. Can you handle that?" "With pleasure," Jimmy replied. "We've been wanting to cause that bastard some trouble for months." They spent the rest of the day planning their approach and timing. The distraction would begin at 2 o'clock, giving Sam and Clara time to reach the courthouse, while attention was focused elsewhere. It was a risky plan, but it was the best they could manage with their limited resources. As the appointed time approached, Sam and Clara made their way down the mountainside toward the northern edge of Albuquerque. They moved carefully, using every scrap of cover available, their weapons ready and their senses alert for any sign of trouble. Behind them, Jimmy and his men were preparing to ride into town, shooting and shouting, claiming to be pursuing bandits they had spotted heading south. It would create chaos and confusion, and hopefully buy Sam and Clara the time they needed to reach Elizabeth Warren. "Ready?" Sam asked as they crouched at the edge of town. Clara checked the evidence packages one final time, making sure everything was secure. "Ready." In the distance, they could hear the first sounds of Jimmy's distraction gunshots, shouting voices, the thunder of horses galloping through the streets. Almost immediately, men began running toward the commotion, including several who had been lounging near the courthouse with the casual alertness of professional watchers. "Now," Sam said. They moved quickly through the back streets of Albuquerque, staying in the shadows and avoiding the main thoroughfares where they might be spotted. The courthouse loomed ahead of them, its impressive facade speaking of federal authority and the rule of law. The building's main entrance was still guarded, but the watchers were distracted by the chaos Jimmy had created on the other side of town. Sam and Clara slipped through a side door used by clerks and court officials, then made their way up the stairs toward the 3rd floor. Elizabeth Warren's office was at the end of a long hallway lined with law books and legal documents. The nameplate on the door read Federal Prosecutor, Territory of New Mexico, and below it, in smaller letters, E. Warren Esquire. Sam knocked on the door, his heart pounding with the knowledge that everything they had fought for came down to this moment. "Come in," a woman's voice called from inside. They entered to find a woman in her 40s seated behind a substantial desk covered with legal papers. Elizabeth Warren was smaller than Sam had expected, but her eyes held the kind of steel that suggested she was not easily intimidated. "Miss Warren," Clara began, "my name is Clara Whitfield, and I have evidence of federal crimes that—" Warren held up her hand, cutting Clara off mid-sentence. "Before you say another word, Miss Whitfield, you should know that Victor Caldwell visited me yesterday. He told me you might be coming here with fabricated evidence designed to damage his reputation." Sam felt his heart sink. They had come so far, risked so much, only to find that Caldwell had beaten them here as well. But then Warren smiled, and Sam saw something in her expression that gave him hope. "He also offered me a substantial bribe to ignore any evidence you might present," Warren continued, "which tells me that whatever you have must be very damaging indeed. Now let's see what you've brought me." For the next 2 hours, Sam and Clara laid out their case against Victor Caldwell, The war crimes evidence, the land fraud documents, the witness statements and photographs that painted a picture of systematic murder and corruption spanning decades. Warren examined each piece of evidence carefully, asking detailed questions and taking extensive notes. She was thorough professional and obviously experienced in building cases against powerful men who thought themselves above the law. "This is extraordinary," Warren said finally. "The scope of Caldwell's crimes, the documentation your father gathered, the historical evidence from your family's records, it's enough to destroy him completely." "Can you act on it?" Clara asked. "I can and I will. I'll file federal charges immediately and I'll request warrants for Caldwell's arrest on multiple counts of murder, fraud, and conspiracy. The evidence is so strong that even his political connections won't be able to protect him." Sam felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he had been carrying for 15 years. Justice for Willow Creek, for Clara's father, for all of Caldwell's victims was finally within reach. "How long will it take?" Clara asked. "The paperwork can be filed today. Federal marshals can be in the field by tomorrow morning. If Caldwell is still in Socorro, he should be in custody within 48 hours. Warren stood and walked to her window, looking out at the busy streets of Albuquerque. "You've done something remarkable here. Taking on a man like Caldwell, gathering this evidence, getting it to the right authorities, it takes extraordinary courage." "We had help," Sam said, thinking of Father Miguel, Reverend Parker, Jimmy and his men, and all the others who had risked their lives to see justice done. "Good people always do," Warren replied, "but someone has to be willing to take the first step to stand up and say, 'Enough.' That was you two." As they prepared to leave Warren's office, Clara turned back to the prosecutor one final time. "Miss Warren, what happens to people like Elena Santos? The ones Caldwell has been holding against their will. Once he's in custody, we'll search all of his properties and free anyone we find. Your testimony about his methods will help us know where to look." Outside the courthouse, Sam and Clara found Jimmy and his men waiting for them with barely contained excitement. "Well?" Jimmy asked. "Did she believe you?" "She believed us," Clara replied with a smile that seemed to light up the entire street. "Victor Caldwell is going to pay for everything he's done." That night in a hotel room that Elizabeth Warren had arranged for their protection, Sam and Clara finally allowed themselves to believe that their long fight was over. The evidence had been delivered, the machinery of federal justice was in motion, and Victor Caldwell's reign of terror was coming to an end. "What now?" Clara asked as they stood on the hotel balcony looking out at the stars that seemed brighter and more beautiful than they had in months. "Now we start over," Sam replied, taking her hand in his. "Build something new on the foundation of what we've been through together. Together. If you'll have me, I know I'm not much a broken-down ex-soldier with more ghosts than prospects, but I love you, Clara Whitfield, and I want to spend whatever time I have left making you happy." Clara turned to face him, her eyes shining with tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Samuel Holloway, you are everything I never knew I was looking for. Yes, I'll have you. For as long as you'll stay." They held each other as the desert wind carried the sounds of a territory finally free from the shadow of Victor Caldwell's evil. In the distance, church bells rang the hour, their bronze voices speaking of hope and redemption, and the promise that justice, however long delayed, would ultimately prevail. The woman in white who had stumbled out of the desert with a bullet in her side had found more than just sanctuary in the arms of a broken soldier. She had found love, purpose, and the strength to fight for what was right. And the man who had carried her to water had discovered that salvation sometimes came in the form of someone who needed saving just as much as you did. Their story was far from over, but the first chapter had ended exactly as it should, with truth. Triumphant love victorious, and the promise of a future built on the solid foundation of courage and commitment. In the morning, federal marshals would ride out to arrest Victor Caldwell. Justice would be served, the innocent would be freed, and the territory would begin to heal from years of corruption and fear. But tonight, Sam and Clara Holloway, for that's what she would be as soon as they could find a preacher, stood together under the vast New Mexico sky, two souls who had found in each other the strength to change the world.